For a large portion of my life, I've been plagued by the same dream. I'm in a room with a large computer that can view different universes, but I'm only allowed to look at one. Infinite choices, and yet the question was always mind-numbingly simple. Do I look at the world that's better? Not a world where I'm perfect, but a place where I'm allowed to make the mistakes that I'm told are what makes me human without it being used as a justification for how incompetent I am. Every time I'd find myself about to view that perfect world but hesitating, wondering if this was opening Pandora's box. If I understood why my life felt so hollow, the shape of that missing puzzle piece I feel weighing me down every waking moment, would I ever be able to go back? Could I go on living, knowing exactly what was taken from me? In order to be happy in a world that asks me to constantly demonstrate a reason for my existence like I'm some prop, I almost gave up my ability to dream. I was asking the wrong question. They stole your future. They robbed you of your destiny. The only question is, do you want it back? Okay, now before I actually start talking about the ultimates, there is a few issues that led up to it, but I don't find them super interesting to talk about in depth, so I'm just going to try to recap as fast as I can. The old Ultimate Universe from the 2000s, Mr. Fantastic turns evil, calls himself the Maker, and is dedicated to making a perfect world. Travels to this new Ultimate Universe that is unsuspecting. He finds a time machine and just starts going around and systematically preventing every superhero from being created. He rules the world unopposed for about 60 years. Howard Stark, the Iron Man, is the person who invented that time machine. The Maker enlists him to make the time machine so as to not create a paradox where the Maker changes the world with a time machine that never actually is invented or exists. Howard learns the dark truth of the world, a grand experiment to make a population that is the easiest to control through manufactured wars and a surveillance state. Howard is able to say goodbye to his son, Tony Stark, before he's thrown in the Maker's own personal prison/lab, where he is able to hatch a scheme with Doom, the Reed Richards of this universe. Kang the Conqueror is also here, with an Iron Man suit and the time machine embedded in his chest, alongside an army of genetically duplicated Ultimates. Kang is hell-bent on killing the Maker for some reason, not important right now. Howard and Doom use Kang's attack on the Maker as a distraction to start enacting their plan. Doom escapes with one of the time machines, the Immortus engine as they call it, as Howard sacrifices himself, sealing himself, Kang, and the Maker inside the Maker's own prison for 2 years. Except the time inside the Citadel travels faster, which means that Howard did not sacrifice only 2 years. He will be there for thousands of years if he survives that long. Howard, now accepting his fate, walks over to Kang and takes off the mask, assuming he will see his own face underneath. But he's surprised at the face he actually sees. We cut to Doom as he gives the time machine to Tony Stark. Tony then makes his own suit of armor, identical to Kang the Conqueror's except different colors, dubbing himself Iron Lad with the time machine embedded in his chest. They quickly get to work, securing Captain America from the ice and then freeing Thor from Loki's prison, accompanied by his jailer, Lady Sif. The leaders of the world begin their open war on this new team of terrorists, as they label them, sending Captain Britain, who is able to mortally wound Thor before getting an eye taken by Iron Lad. In response, the Maker's Council takes control of a Stark satellite and uses it to bomb New York City, killing thousands and blaming it all on Tony Stark. Our team of renegades are also caught up in the attack, leaving them no choice but to travel 6 months into the future to escape the onslaught. That was about as short as I could make that recap, but it was important because each issue of Ultimates focuses on a different character, which means that these videos will kind of act as character analysis, and this video is going to be focused mostly on Iron Lad. So going into this, the 3 most important things we need to know about Iron Lad are the world he grew up in, this authoritarian regime, his relationship to his father, and the fact that it seems like he is going to be Kang the Conqueror. Hell, Iron Lad as a moniker is even a reference to this, as Iron Lad in the main universe is a teenage version of Kang who's trying to avoid his own destiny by being a hero. His fate seems inevitable, but throughout this issue we will get a very different picture of Tony, which will leave us the question, how does this good-hearted kid turn into a monster? We open with the wreckage of New York. Dear Dad, dear God, you sure made a mess of things, didn't you?
What a mess.
We can fix it.
I was referring to us, Iron Lad. We are a mess.
Tony and Doom discuss their precarious situation, an ally trapped in ice and another gravely injured. The whole world thinks they're terrorists and, as they put it, only 18 months till the devil breaks out of hell. But we have a time machine. We can fix it. Intercut throughout this entire issue is a notes document by Tony, a letter he's writing to his dad, one he knows will probably never be read by him. As he puts it, 6 months, Dad. 6 months you've been gone to the world. 6 months trapped with that monster. For you, it probably seemed like 1,000 years, but for us, it is like yesterday. Immediately from the first page, we can see that Tony is an extremely ambitious and optimistic person. They have a time machine. He focuses on the positives. The note he leaves for his father assumes that somehow his father, who has been trapped with a psychopath for thousands of years in an enclosed space, managed to live. It leads to him and Doom having a really fun dynamic. Tony is all ideals. He's new here. No real experience though, while Doom simply can't look on the bright side because of what he has experienced, the torture in the Maker's Citadel. There's a passage in Ultimate Invasion that I skipped over, but it explains Doom's torture really well. He kind of talks about the abstract warping of time, how time is slowed there, but you can't get a sense of how much time is actually passing, how long you've been there. So Doom focused on a single beam of light. He ran a bunch of tests, determined that it was sunlight in almost every way, but as he kept looking at it, something was just a little off. And so one day, he eventually shouted out to no one that the light was fake. And in response, the Maker chuckled and just moved the light around a little bit. Ooh, whoa. I was supposed to have somebody else for this bit, but I have procrastinated too much. So, the Maker stole his face, his name, and his ability to perceive time. While Tony and Doom are both geniuses united behind the same goal of fixing the world, they couldn't be more different. Next, we get a page of Tony and Doom planning on how to use the time machine effectively. Tony suggests just going back 60 years and fixing everything, but Doom explains that the Maker's work is not so easily unmade. Temporal barriers the Maker set up block them from going past 6 months backwards in time. Tony suggests stopping the New York attack, but Doom questions how. They failed back then and they don't have any more resources now. Of course, I'd been thinking about how to change the world since my 5th birthday. Ultimates 1.0, Tony explains, is a superhero resistance network, using the things they stole from the Maker, being his files and origin devices. Basically, the Maker bottled up everyone's origin story and kept them all as trophies. Tony proposes using the origin device to recreate a universe in the Maker's files, Earth 616, the mainline Marvel universe. I propose we put right what the Maker put wrong, to help this world become the world it is supposed to be, a world of heroes.
This world is not that one. Realities diverge. The Maker has purged himself of mercy. The people in these files are likely dead.
Then we'll find replacements. With the population data and computing power at our disposal, we can find near perfect substitutes. Where history fails, we'll let science choose. God, I just love this comic. Denise Camp might be one of my favorite writers of all time. And I think where he really shines through is the dialogue. Firstly, the dialogue here between two geniuses is some of the best I've ever seen. Doom understands the rules of time travel a little better, so Tony is there asking questions But then we switch to Tony's plan and their roles swap. Doom is the one asking questions and providing feedback. This may seem like a small thing, but I think it's worth pointing out because their genius isn't conveyed by them knowing an impossible amount of information, them just regurgitating facts at you. But rather it's their ability to ask good questions and adapt to new information. Superheroes are role models, and small things like these just set a good example of what people should aspire to be. That's something I just really appreciate. But Denis Camp's defining skill in my mind is the flow of his dialogue. He does something that I can't think of a medium besides comic books that would be able to accomplish this well. I've already brought up these text boxes that Tony is saying because effectively they act as his internal narration, which becomes interesting because we get to see the things he keeps to himself. This line here, well, I've been thinking about how to change the world since my 5th birthday, is interesting because he doesn't say it to Doom. He doesn't need to validate himself to Doom like that and say that, oh, well, I've been a genius since I was 5, so he keeps it to... But he doesn't keep it to himself, does he? These text boxes are to his dad, the entire issue. The truly crazy part is that you can ignore the entire issue and just read these text boxes and it is one single message Tony is sending to his dad. And it makes perfect sense. In fact, it recontextualizes a few moments if you do this. In an off-the-books Stain Stark corporate spy satellite, we worked it all out. Of course, I've been thinking about how to change the world since my 5th birthday. But Doom had his own ideas. When you read them back to back like that, very different context. This comment about him thinking about how to change the world since he was 5 bolsters himself up quite a bit. He's trying to impress his dad. This back and forth between geniuses is very twisted in Tony's retelling, but Doom had his own ideas. Own is specifically underlined to put emphasis on it. Own ideas. And then between the two lines, he says, I've been thinking about how to change the world since my 5th birthday, period. But Doom had his own ideas. That period into a but makes Doom, it feels very intrusive, like Doom's thoughts are not wanted. Tony praises Doom in these notes the rest of the issue. So I truly doubt this was at all like an intentional thing, just a slip up of a boy desperately trying to impress his father. As I stated before, this dialogue works really well in a comic book, which means that I cannot fully convey how good it is through this video, so I truly suggest you read this comic for yourself. Doom suggests that the origin machines could work with a few adjustments. They have to use the time machine. Tony says that would complicate the calculations too much, but Doom responds,
Leave the calculations to me. We'll build your ultimate network 6 months in the past and have our army overnight. 4 dimensions, Iron Lad. 4 at least.
During this, Tony also writes, he is unsettling and brilliant, intense. Not quite the Maker, but there is a resemblance. I tried to call him Reed, but he insists I call him Doom. Okay, so while I said this video was going to be focused on Iron Lad, I do want to talk about Doom just a little more. Now, after I posted my last video, I was really surprised and happy to see that a lot of people commented that they don't know anything about the comics, but they were still able to enjoy my video. Unfortunately, the Ultimate Comics reference its source material a lot more, especially to push its themes. This idea of your future being stolen from you, it uses the main universe as a direct comparison. That's the future that was stolen from them. So I do have to explain some stuff in order to make the illusions clear, but I'm going to try to keep it as simple as possible and not dive too deeply into comic book history because it's overly complicated and pretty inaccessible even to me. Reed Richards is Mr. Fantastic, stretchy science guy, superhero, and a core member of Marvel's first family, the Fantastic Four, in the main universe. However, in the old Ultimate Universe, he becomes the Maker. Small changes that leads the maker to becoming a villain are very interesting, and I might go into it deeper in a different video, but simply put, Mr. Fantastic has always been an explorer of the world's wonders. He wanted to discover everything, learn everything, while the maker was an explorer as well, but one that just wanted to find somewhere to escape his miserable upbringing and life. He wanted to find a better world, a perfect world. And after he couldn't find that already existing, he decided to make it himself. Now, Victor Von Doom, or Dr. Doom, is a genius supervillain and leader of the fictional country of Latveria, and both of their arch nemesis. As I mentioned before, this Dr. Doom in the Ultimates is Reed Richards. The actual Victor Von Doom was most likely killed in his crib by the maker or something. And it's important to note that the maker's lab/prison, his citadel that I was talking about earlier, is in Latveria as just another spitting on his arch nemesis's grave. The Doom we follow in this universe is an alternate version of the maker. When Tony mentions a resemblance, it is very literal. The maker welded the mask of his arch nemesis onto his alternate universe doppelganger. Wild. Also important to note, Doom doesn't know why he was tortured. Why him? He doesn't know that he's an alternate universe version of the maker. It is just this looming mystery over his head. And so while he's dealing with all this trauma, he can't really move on from it, because there is that huge unanswered question of why. This panel really stands out. Doom just looking at this future that was stolen from him, the family that was stolen from him. The artist for this series, Juan Frigeri, and I'm really sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, but he does not get the credit he deserves. He can't use Doom's facial expressions to convey emotions because of the mask, so the work is solely done by composition and lighting. So a panel like this, which has Doom fully in shadow, is able to convey this dread and this almost disassociation, like Doom isn't really there. But there are a few small spots on the mask where we can see reflections of the light, just a few accents. It gives this feeling like Doom can't even, for a second, escape into this fantasy. Like the mask is always there weighing him down. And the colorist in this book, Federico Blee, such a fantastic job. I love the colors here because it just screams superhero with these super saturated reds and blues, and I love it. It would be so easy to have a darker world like this be very desaturated, but I think that would be in a way betraying its own concept of a world with superheroes, the fantasy of it all, the hope. In this panel though, it's important to point out the use of halftones for the image of the stolen future Earth 616. Halftones are an old comic book coloring technique that was used to save money, but it invokes this nostalgia and an age that has been lost. And again, this disassociation, we can obviously see that that world is different from this one. The orange hue also really sells this idea because the entire comic up to this point has been overwhelmingly blue. This couldn't stand out any more than it does here. Last point on Doom as a character, he uses the number 4 a lot, which on paper should sound pretty corny, like, oh, it's pretty fantastic, but it doesn't. Every time Doom randomly brings up the number 4 and kind of pushes it into conversation, it gives off this agony that he's going through, and it's just, God, this comic's great. Next, we see Tony doing calculations on the Spider-Man suit, which will be sent to Peter Parker in Ultimate Spider-Man #1, which came out around 6 months before this issue, so it actually lines up really well. While Doom did the math, I designed super identities and calculated the probability of heroism as a function of location, age, physiological history, past trauma, and 244 other unique variables. Okay, I know I just did a big spiel, but what the hell does this mean? 248 variables to determine how heroic somebody is. This is ridiculous. This is the exact same dialogue I was just praising the comic for not having. This is genius characters just throwing out nonsense math to prove how intelligent they are. All of the genius dialogue so far has been very easy to engage with as a reader and very easy to follow. This, however, is skimmed past in a very intentional way. In the following issues, this comic becomes extremely critical of the idea behind this equation. Just as a fun exercise, I want to try to engage with this dialogue that I think you aren't supposed to be able to, okay? So let's just theorize, what does this equation mean? I'm assuming these have to be assigned a number value. They're not going to have a 1-year-old or a 100-year-old, so I'm assuming it's boiled down to 18 to 50. Location, are we just ranking locations? Is it a 1 to 10 scale? What determines a better location for somebody to be heroic in? Is more past trauma good? Is being an older age better? So maybe age, more experience is good, but also being young and idealistic is good. All of this also is just stuff, frankly, you're born with, stuff that happens to you. This isn't actually people's choices. This is things that are innate to them. And then this is all put into even more question when we remember that this panel, the writing on this panel, is specifically put in the context of him making Spider-Man's origin box. It's mentioned that Spider-Man is #1 on the maker's list of dangers, specifically in Ultimate Spider-Man #1. Position on the maker's list is one of those variables, which leads to some very interesting implications. I think that really gets to the problem at the heart of this equation, which is that no one person can decide the attributes that make up a good person. Everyone's idea of good is subjective. No one has the authority to declare, this is what makes a good person. This is mathematically what makes a good person. And Tony's equation also goes off of the maker's list. It isn't just Tony's deciding. He has specifically put into his equation what the maker thinks makes a dangerous hero. It's, in a big way, admitting that the maker is in some way right, which is fundamentally opposed to Tony's worldview.
In Between Heroes, I cracked the Captain America problem. 75 years had passed, but for him, it was an instant. Time travel. I told Captain America the United States broke up in 1969. All things considered, he took it pretty well.
The mention that the United States disbanded here is pretty interesting, especially when we flip to the back of the book and we can actually see a world map, which I think has 7 nations. It's a little hard to stare at because it looks like a colorblind test. So the main purpose of this combining of nations, though, is just to simplify things. Fascism and authoritarianism love when things are simple. This guy is the bad guy, and we fight the bad guy, so we are good guy. Nuance is a threat to their order. Thinking too hard is a threat to their order. They want to sell you the simplest story possible, something a child could understand. So there's only 7 moving parts. Fewer characters makes for an easier narrative. However, this world map, initially I was mad that it was drawn like a colorblind test, but I've actually come to like it because there's this weird iffiness to it. These borders aren't super defined. I think it goes to show just how everything's the same, really. We can have these different colors, but at the borders, it all just kind of meshes together. They all serve the same purpose, the same maker.
The world, even this one, even ours, it has such wonders I never knew. There are gods, Dad. Did you know that there are gods? In the room next door, a god bled out all over the floor. Who do you think gods pray to when they pray?
Tony does ask if Sif needs anything, but she declines, saying that gods grant gifts to mortals, not the other way around. I find Thor and Sif really fascinating characters because this idea of your future was stolen from you is very literal for them.
I mean, they have such a large lifespan that they have seen this shift. They have seen the change in the world. In a later issue, they bring up the Norse prophecies, specifically like Ragnarok, where they say that the future is predetermined. They have their destiny. Nothing will stop their destiny from happening. The Maker's influence won't change that. This is all predetermined to a certain degree. It's very interesting because compared to the rest of the cats, it gives them this strange, blind optimism. Feels like the wrong word because for them it is a fact. It is not hope. They know everything will work out. I guess you'd call that faith. It works well for showing how disjointed this team is, as well as the world as a whole. And honestly, I find it a very relatable idea. I have met people who don't want to take dramatic action because of this idea of predetermination. Everything will work out in their favor because everything happens for a reason. The evils of the world are a necessity. They exist as part of a grand plan that we can't see. But in saying that, I think we undermine our own authority. I think the idea of a grand plan isn't inherently bad, but we have to understand that if there is a grand plan, if there is some fate driving us all, that we have a part to play in that. We are not just a bystander to the world. They also refuse help from Iron Lad because of this idea that they have a certain status, and with that status comes expectations that they shouldn't accept help from mortals, from those beneath them. I think it's an interesting way to show that we have this internal hierarchy of who should help who, and it really gets in the way of us just genuinely helping each other. Now, I need to talk about Tony's message to his dad in this part because I think it really does a good job showing just how complicated their relationship is. It starts off with Tony explaining something that excites him. Really just talking about there are gods. This is amazing, the wonders of the world that he never knew. But the tone very quickly shifts. The wonders of the world have been defiled before Tony even got here. Then finally, who do gods pray to when they pray? This world does have this pure divinity in it, this idea of predetermination, this faith, this fate to it. And yet, this higher power is praying to an even higher power. It feels hopeless. For 6 days, I didn't sleep, I didn't eat. While I worked, my armor fed concentrated nutritions and proprietary stark stimulants directly into my bloodstream. 6 days preparing catalysts and calculating trajectories through the fourth dimension. 6 days checking and rechecking our math.
Tony is so fixated on a task that he is not eating or sleeping for over a week. I would say how unhealthy this is, but I'm not really one to talk. Put a pin in this, we'll loop back to this later. Also, just want to point out, Doom is just drinking a cup of coffee compared to Tony injecting stimulants directly into his bloodstream, which I love that difference.
On the seventh day, there are gods, Dad. We were ready.
I love that line so much. Writing this section involved me just pacing around my room back and forth for like over an hour, just thinking about it. It racks around in my mind. I love it. Divinity and gods are by no means a consistent topic in the Ultimates, but I think we can kind of expand the topic a little more to just creators in general. The Maker conceptually is strangely close to a godlike figure. He is immortal, the smartest man on earth, and a shapeshifter, highly adaptable, in this very specific kind of mythological criteria for a god. Tony here is referencing the seventh day, specifically Christian God, which in the Bible, on the seventh day, God rested after spending 6 days creating his ideal universe. And here we see Tony creating his ideal world, a world of superheroes. I want to make it abundantly clear that what I'm talking about is not trying to criticize or question anyone's religious beliefs. What I'm talking about is self-determination. True freedom is not being able to choose a path within an already pre-created rigid system, like the game of life. It is being able to genuinely express yourself, and through that expression, change the world around you, create your own path. Tony is not claiming to be God in any literal sense, but rather I think this is a preemptive rebuttal, like Tony cutting in before this imaginary version of Howard even has the chance to say, keep your ego in check, you're not God. This issue starts out with Tony saying, "Dear Dad" in his message, and then immediately in real life saying, "Dear God." There's clearly an association to be drawn from those two right next to each other back to back. And I think it again plays into that idea of one's God being one's creator. Tony later in this issue claims that Howard could have done more. He could have helped the world, but he didn't. And in some small way, that makes him this world's creator. Now, Thor and Sif are an interesting piece to this because they are in no way a depiction of an omnipotent God, but Tony is using their existence as a justification for his allusion to Christian God, a notoriously omnipotent force. Marvel's depiction of Thor and Sif are just people with superpowers, general superhuman abilities and prowess, which leads me to the awfully intense question that I promise is relevant of why do we like superpowers in the first place? What is the draw of superheroes? Because there's clearly something here. There's something that draws us in. Sure, maybe it is the idea of a man lifting a car over his head that gets us immediately interested, but why do we continue this fascination with them? And this draw isn't just recent memory either. This is history. I mean, we have been telling superhero stories since... I feel pretty safe in saying the beginning of human history, but I can settle for Greek mythology if you really want to play it safe. I don't think that Heracles, these first superheroes being demigods, is a coincidence either. There is a weird association between superpowers, superheroes, and a certain godhood. Why do we read these stories? Why do we find these characters so relatable, yet desperately want to be them? Maybe they draw you in with the idea of what if you could lift a car over your head, but what really keeps you reading is the idea of what if we even the playing field? What if nobody could stop you from doing what you think is right? What if the rules couldn't be applied to you? What if the rules didn't apply to you? What would you do? What would you do if no one else was telling you what is right or wrong? It is just you. You determine your own actions. You're free to make your own choices. Self-determination. That's what superheroes have always been about.
Doom declares that they're ready, but Steve Rogers speaks up saying that it won't work. Revolutions start on the ground and heroes don't come out of a box. Doom corrects Steve, saying it's not a revolution, closer to an experiment, one to shake up the world. Steve isn't convinced. Tony says the math all checks out and Steve just throws up his hands with a shrug. I'll admit it, the moment itself was a little anticlimactic. But time travel is instantaneous. 1 second after we sent our origin boxes into the past, they would have always been there. 1,200 miles above Earth's atmosphere, I opened a window, ready to look out onto a world overflowing with heroes. It looks...
the same.
yeah, pretty much the same. Shoot.
Worse, in fact. Measurably worse.
That's Steve Rogers. He really is a perfect human. He didn't even say, "I told you so." Looks like only 1 or 2 took. The rest, all rejected, intercepted, or deceased. A lot of accidental suicide by superpower. Okay, I admit it. I have not yet conquered time.
I get genuinely upset every time that I remember that he is going to turn into Kang, I'm not gonna lie. Anyways, I find this plan fascinating, especially the reasons why it didn't work. Steve's explanation, heroes don't come out of boxes, is pretty good, but I want to get more specific. They didn't understand what they were really asking of people. This isn't just people taking a risk. Rebelling against the system is hard, and that's by design. Food, water, shelter, and all your other basic necessities are withheld from us unless we comply with this order. Exhaust ourselves at a dead-end job for the bare minimum. Tony talked about the Ultimates as a superhero network, but that's not what this plan was. Best case scenario, everyone was isolated trying to be a hero on their own for 6 months. Expecting people around us to just get up and do good is never going to accomplish anything. We have to inspire each other and, most importantly, build the infrastructure to allow people to rebel without having to die for it. Spider-Man is the only one we can see here that the plan worked on, and in Ultimate Spider-Man #1 we see exactly why. The entire issue is dedicated to him discussing with his family if it's okay for him to take this risk. Most importantly, will their finances be okay? Will they be able to purchase food if he does this? He is in a very fortunate position to be allowed to take this risk. The problem with a revolution is not a lack of power, it is a lack of options.
Steve suggested for right now they time travel the old-fashioned way, 1 second at a time. Doom says that's an overreaction. They argue until Tony cuts them off, declaring that Steve's right. They ruin lives. The Immortus engine is off limits. No more time travel.
This may come as a shock, but I do agree with Doom here. Completely ruling out time travel is an overreaction, but it's one that I really like for Tony's character. He has this very cool and confident demeanor the whole issue, very much how we would assume Tony Stark would act. But the second he realizes that something he did hurt people, it's done, it's over. He may appear a little above it all and cold, but when he feels emotion, the floodgates open, and he can be extremely emotionally driven. Put a pin in that.
We cut to Janet and Hank Pym, exterminators for hire, as they get debriefed by the restaurant owner. Hank steps on a cockroach as the owner explains that they gotta keep their voices down or else customers will hear. Hank apologizes, but it's important to note that he does it while checking his boot, and the text saying sorry is smaller than the owner's text, making it look off, like Hank isn't talking to the owner. He's apologizing to the cockroach. Jenna and Hank head into the basement as they talk about Hank's nightmares, dreams about ants begging for their lives. Hank says he's a mess, she'd be better off without him, but Janet reassures him that she loves him and that everybody's a mess. They then talk about how they wish things were different. There has to be more to life than squashing bugs. Janet throws in wanting kids to Hank's bewilderment as a family of moloids. We cut outside as Jen and Hank tell the restaurant owner that the deal is off. They say they won't kill anything with a culture. Hank backs this up by saying that moloids tell stories and bury their dead. They suggest a humane relocation service, but the restaurant owner just wants them gone, offering to pay triple, but Jana and Hank storm off. Then in the car they talk about how killing moloids isn't even a crime.
Denise Camp is so good at writing, it's insane. I write a lot, and it feels like that one image of like All Might and Endeavor, where the better I get at writing, the more I understand how big the gap is between us. In just 3 pages, we have gotten an amazing ground look at this world, an introduction to 2 new characters, and a fantastic bit of world building with the moloids. It feels like every piece of dialogue serves multiple functions, and God, I just love it. This idea of your future was stolen from you is really abstract, especially when trying to put it into our lives compared to the Ultimates. They know for a fact what was taken, they've seen it. But here we get a much more relatable perspective. Your future was stolen from you portrays this image of a grand realization when you finally learn the truth. But the true tragedy is just waking up every day, waiting for that one thing that is supposed to kickstart your life, and slowly coming to the realization that whatever that thing was, whatever was supposed to start your story, is never coming. Diving deeper with these characters though, although we won't talk about Janet too much with this issue, we can see that she is very calm and collected and is also the main one giving this idea of shouldn't things be better. Hank, on the other hand, is hard to talk about because of how infamous his main universe counterpart is, which is something I'd prefer not to dive into, so I'm going to procrastinate it till later in this video. I do like him as a character though, especially here. I feel like the heart of his character, the main essence of what he is supposed to be, is shown really well here. In his best adaptations, Hank Pym is always about this bottomless well of empathy. The Ant-Man who can grow big and small is always the focus, but I find much more interesting his helmet. Him inventing a device that lets him communicate with ants. A species that notoriously will build civilizations. Hank's criteria for the species he won't kill, things with a culture, an argument could be made for ants. They bury their dead and they communicate effectively. Maybe not telling stories like we do, but the argument could be made. Mainline Hank invented a device that allowed him to talk to ants, something that is so physically beneath him, yet to him deserved enough respect to want to communicate with. We're introduced to Mainline Hank with him stepping on a cockroach and then apologizing. Hank Pym, at his best, is a character who thinks that no living creature is smaller than him. Everything deserves a certain level of respect as a living being. And I can't help but just love that. Now, I want to quickly touch on that idea a bit more of species and culture. Moloids, for context, are a race of underground-dwelling people in the Marvel Universe. This mention that it is mainstream consensus that you can just kill Moloids is really good at characterizing Hank and shows that his empathy evolves past the rules handed down to him. What he is told is right and wrong. He does decide that for himself. But I think it also introduces another very interesting question. How do we decide what is human? What is deserving of the level of respect we give each other? What determines that humanity? Where do we draw the line between murder and extermination?
Janet talks about her own strange dream. She was in their apartment, but everything was the wrong size as Tony descends down in front of the car. Hank slams on the brakes before swerving away from Tony. Janet starts asking questions as Hank sweats profusely, telling her that he would never do anything to hurt her. Janet tells Hank he wouldn't hurt a fly as Thor's hammer rockets through the car's engine. The origin machine rolls out of the backseat as the hologram of Tony activates, starting the message saying they were supposed to be great heroes. It's us who should apologize. There was a miscommunication. I'm sorry about the van. We're still figuring everything out. Ugh, I hate my voice on recordings. I sound so cold. No wonder these things didn't work.
Tony sounds cold. Put a pin in that one too.
The recording of Tony mentions how the Maker altered both their destinies by giving Hank irreversible brain damage. Janet mentions Hank's accident, but Hank can't remember it. Janet barges out of the car and tells Tony that he killed thousands, as Tony says that he hopes she's not somebody who believes everything she's told. Tony and Captain America begin to explain the vision, fixing the world, and how they need help, but they're interrupted. Captain Britain screams out in French, surrounded by the Black Crusade, his own personal militia composed of European folklore. Tony readies to attack as the Ultimates follow behind him. Ultimates! Attack! Janet comforts Hank as he admits to hiding the origin machine, scared he would lose Janet. Janet interrupts him.
I'm tired of feeling afraid, aren't you? There's more to life than squashing bugs, Hank. There has to be. I love you no matter what choice you make, but this is mine.
The Wasp costume covers Janet as she immediately lifts off to join the fight. A laser hits her as she tumbles to the ground, but she gets right back up and says how amazing that was, overjoyed. Hank stays by the van, saying that
I don't deserve her.
She doesn't seem to agree.
She doesn't know. She hasn't read them. I read them. The files about who we're supposed to be. I read everything. She's supposed to be a superhero. She's supposed to make the world a better place. Me? Even in that reality, I'm a mess. A failure, hero, villain, good, bad, or mad. I can't seem to make up my mind. I'm a loser at best, a menace at worst. I'm dangerous. The things it says I did. It says I hurt people. It says I hurt her, my Janet. I'd never hurt her, but I do. It already happened.
So I kind of have to explain mainline Hank Pym, which I was avoiding doing, but here we go. Okay. He starts off as a scientist, then he invents Ant-Man suit, okay? He becomes Ant-Man, then he becomes Giant Man, which is just basically Ant-Man, except he just grows bigger most of the time instead of smaller. And it's kind of a thing of like, if he's smaller, he's Ant-Man, if he's bigger, he's Giant Man. And then he turns into Yellow Jacket, which is kind of a villain. He like hits his wife Janet during this time, which is like what he's infamously known for. He also creates a mass murdering psychotic robot, and all of the time, he's depressed. Look, trying to extract a theme out of a comic book character is a very hard task. There are like 50 years of history here with a lot of different writers all doing their own takes. However, modern day writers still try to make sense of these characters. And in a fairly recent run, all things considered, it was retconned in that Hank discovers he is bipolar as an explanation for his erratic behavior. Now, surface level my thoughts, I think that the high highs and low lows in some of Hank's basic characterization, it is fitting. However, I couldn't find anybody with actual bipolar disorder talking about if it was good representation or not, which I think that is the most important thing. So I'll say surface level it makes sense, but like I'm not going to say whether or not it was a great choice. I do think Hank's character, especially in recent memory, has been focused on him becoming a healthier individual and kind of dealing with his mental problems, so it's definitely not done out of bad faith, at least. Now, I don't know if Ultimate Hank is written to be bipolar. Honestly, I doubt he is. There isn't really anything giving me the impression that he is. But I still think mainline Hank being bipolar is fairly relevant to this, because his symptoms really become apparent because of the unhealthy situations he puts himself in order to prove his intelligence. He is a character that deals a lot with confidence and inferiority and a superiority complex. I mean, he literally switches from feeling smaller than everyone else to bigger than everyone else, and also insane, I guess. Ultimate Hank is mentally handicapped. He literally cannot think too hard without getting a migraine. So that intelligence that Hank usually values himself based off of is gone. And that leads to a lot of interesting questions about the character and is what makes the comparison so important in my eyes. Narratively, looking back, Hank's bipolar symptoms have always been used as a cost of his genius, almost the mad scientist archetype, which we'll loop back to that idea later. However, I want to end this by saying that if Ultimate Hank is written to be bipolar, it is very interesting to me because it isn't apparent, because he is in a very healthy environment. We can see this with his physique. Hank, even in the mainline comics, will gain weight whenever he is in a healthier mindset. It is a clear way to indicate how Hank is doing depending on the comic run you're reading.
I don't have any answers for you, Henry. Certainly no guarantees. I can only say that that man is not you. His failures are not your failures. His sins are not yours. In my experience, Henry, there are times that call for us to be bigger than ourselves, for the greater good.
Captain Britain and Iron Lad battle. Captain Britain threatens to take an eye from Iron Lad to replace the one he lost, but Tony blasts him off, saying, "Eye for an eye had its day. Time for something new." Eventually, though, Britain gets the upper hand, hitting Tony to the ground. Britain starts monologuing about how he traced his lineage to King Louis XIV, the Sun King himself, saying he was born to rule the world. He then cites how he made Avalon's most holy symbols mockeries. Arthur's round table was broken into firewood, the Lady of the Lake taken as his concubine, and the Holy Grail made his chamber pot. Britain says he has crushed the soul of a people beneath his boot, as Tony blasts away, saying that there's something Louis learned that he should learn too. There are more of us than there are of you, and our boots are bigger. Hank, the size of a skyscraper, slowly presses down on the entire army, squashing them, turning to Janet and saying,
And you said there's more to life than squashing bugs?
Captain Britain is a character that I like a lot, and him being French is a really funny choice for his character. It kind of goes into that idea of the world being simplified, this cultural homogeny that has happened. Like British and French, there's no difference to it. Cultures are being erased, and that's shown really well through Captain Britain's speech here. British folklore, this entire culture is being picked through for the parts that are deemed valuable. Arthur's Round Table, its symbolic value is completely disregarded, and instead it's boiled down to the materials used to make it. It is nothing more than wood for the fire. The Holy Grail is useful only as a toilet. The Lady of the Lake is degraded as only being valuable for sex. This cultural homogeny poses a very serious threat, more so than even possibly the easy narrative that this can sell. Our cultures are poked and prodded at. They tear away at what they deem as useful, all according to this very strange metric that doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you think about it.
Want to touch back on Hank and this overwhelming empathy once again, because he kills so many people here and he really does not give a shit. Possibly based? Maybe. I don't know. I think my next video is going to be hyper dedicated to this topic, so subscribe.
We zoom out, seeing the giant footprint left in the street, the Ultimates logo clearly visible, a statement you can see from space. Somebody asks what it is that they're announcing exactly, and Tony responds, I think it says, the Ultimates are here, and we're gonna leave a mark.
I want to hone in on this panel real quick. Online conspiracy claims footprint is proof of God right underneath super terrorists put their foot down on the news headline. It's such a stark contrast, but I think it just goes to show that in a world like this, there are only two ways to understand a genuine act of free will, of revolution. And that's either calling it terrorism or seeing it as a genuine act of God. Tony's ending line is also a very interesting place to leave the issue on, because it's a bit of a double-edged sword. Tony's confidence took a big hit this issue. No more, we're gonna fix the world, but we're gonna leave our mark. It's much more manageable, but I think that this lowering of expectations could eventually be shooting yourself in the foot. Tony has character flaws, but I don't think his ambition was one of them.
The issue ends with a full notes document from Tony. What is failure? You always love questions, but I think that was your favorite. Before anyone could answer, you'd say, failure is what comes before success. I bet it killed in boardrooms and cocktail parties, but I heard it for what it was, a deflection. By then you were usually well into your 10th drink and slurring your words. Howard Stark, the Iron Man. At some point every boy sees his father for what he is, a man with flaws and weaknesses like any other. But I was advanced for my age. I saw it earlier than most. I remember the day exactly. It was my 5th birthday. You were in South America, off at some society gala. I cried and cried, but none of the maids or nurses or nannies could understand why. I cried for 3 days, until you finally came home. You thought I might be ill until I showed you my work. You checked it and could find no fault. I was 5 years old when I mathematically proved that life isn't fair. All I wanted was to talk to you about my findings, but instead you built me a rudimentary psychotherapy AI, a glorified chatbot named Jarvis, because that's the kind of father you were. What other word is there for it but failure? As a father, as a husband, as a leader, as a man, failure. So it's no surprise that this world you helped make, or at least maintain, is also a failure. A world run by fickle monsters. Is that why you drank? You couldn't stand the unobstructed view of what you helped make? For all your brilliance, you never understood. You couldn't imagine how far you'd have to go to really change things. Or perhaps you did understand and simply chose not to. For the sake of your memory, I prefer to believe the former. Don't think your final act of sacrifice absolves you. It doesn't. You took the easy way out, as always. Like I said, it's quite a mess you left, Dad, and now we have to clean it up. What choice do we have? Initially, I thought we could recreate the world that was stolen from us, remake this world in that world's image. But I see now that the maker did his job too well. He's changed too much, bent the moral arc of this universe in the wrong direction. If there's any hope of fixing things, it won't be enough to be as good as the heroes of that simpler world. We'll have to be better. I don't know what that looks like yet, but we're going to figure it out. So thank you for your letter, Dad, and for your sacrifice, but it was too little too late. You should have always been fighting. We all should have been fighting from the start. I'll always love you, Dad, but I'll never forgive you. You were the smartest man in the world. You should have known better. And that is failure. Your son, Tony.
Let's take a step back and look at everything we've learned about Tony, because there's one question I've been avoiding asking. Why is a rich, white 19-year-old trying to fix the world? A world that should benefit him. What exactly... I think the word radicalized has a right-leaning connotation as of late, and even though it literally means like it's leftist, so I don't... What exactly made Tony go woke, go broke?
I think I laughed for like 5 minutes after I wrote that.
Tony, at 5 years old, had a perspective on the world that no one else could understand. His behaviors and actions seem muted at first, veiled behind this cold, confident demeanor, but the second that breaks, he has extreme reactions. When focused on a task, everything else falls to the sidelines, including his own health and well-being. He has this absurd amount of empathy and hates seeing people get hurt, yet seems to just fundamentally misunderstand how people work in most contexts. He has trouble understanding the world, and he often falls back on things he can understand, math and numbers. Tony is one of the best written neurodivergent characters I have ever seen. And the only reason I say one of is because he's kind of fighting for the top spot in my head with a different character who, if you're watching this Denise Camp, you also wrote, so you still get the point. Tony is not outright confirmed to be autistic. Denise Camp said on Twitter that Marvel would be the only ones able to outright confirm that, but he also said that he writes Tony as autistic, which at that point, this seems like such semantics that Tony is autistic. Initially, I was going to record this somewhere else, but somebody forgot to plug in the mic. It was me, I did. Now, after my whole spiel earlier about whether or not a character is good bipolar representation and how uncomfortable I was to really weigh in definitively, it may shock you to learn that I am not autistic. I think. It's iffy. You see, talking about mental disorders is inherently hard because of just how we diagnose and treat them. Mental disorders are defined by a list of traits, observing whether or not a person exhibits certain behaviors and traits that we view as abnormal. Effectively, this means that whenever you go in to get diagnosed, you're compared to what is essentially a stereotype of what that mental disorder is or should look like. Now, of course, this led to problems, but luckily over time, these stereotypes expanded to encompass a lot of different interpretations of the mental disorder, which is good, but over time, they kind of expanded into each other. I, like I assume many others, exist in this weird in-between space, having behaviors that exist in the middle of the Venn diagram, able to be interpreted in multiple different ways, and that I have. At a certain point, I think it weirdly comes down to personal preference. So personally, for me right now, I relate to ADHD the most and think I have overlap with autistic symptoms. There's a chance that changes later on, probably a good chance, but for right now, that's just where I'm at. But those symptoms that I do share with autism does make Tony deeply relatable to me. I hope this illustrates just how fickle this system is. It is by no means an exact science. However, these are observable things, don't get me wrong. I am a walking example of this. I am on stimulant medication right now, something that would result in a major behavioral change for anybody else, but I am just a little more chatty. I want to make it clear that I am by no means questioning neurodiversity as a phenomenon, but rather I think there is value in both understanding Iron Lad as a character and understanding our world as a whole to
to questioning these systems, to questioning how we view neurodiversity as a society. And the first question we really need to ask is, where did this stereotype that we diagnose based off come from? Now, research into autism has two major cornerstones that we're going to be talking about in this video. And while I will be talking almost exclusively about autism, I think it's important to mention that these research papers did have an effect on how we view mental health and neurodiversity as a whole. The first case studies into autistic individuals painted them as like not ordinary people, but not instantly put them in a mental asylum, which was a pretty big stride forward. In August of 1935, Hans Asperger gave a speech dubbed Autistic Psychopathy in Children, which, while not the first use of the term autism, was one of the first times where it was used to describe its own disorder rather than just an adjective to describe schizophrenic people. An adjective that was derived from the Greek word autos, meaning self, implying a morbid fascination with the self, disconnected from the world around them. In other words, selfish. Asperger describes this further as the autist is only himself and is not an active member of the greater organism which he is influenced by and which he influences constantly. Note the use of exclusively male pronouns. That'll become important later. Overall though, this is a very strange speech, especially from a modern lens. Asperger uses the term psychopathy quite loosely, but he does end his speech saying that he does believe autistic people can integrate with the larger world and society. They can fill their role in society, as he puts it, potentially better than anyone else, if they are provided with the most loving and dedicated educators. I like this sentiment. In a vacuum. Asperger was a Nazi though, so rather than just skipping to the end of the speech, let's look at the actual content here. Asperger is using the speech to describe his own case studies into children he deemed autistic. He begins the first case study by describing the behaviors that he was told about that made him want to even research this kid. Behaviors that we now understand as very early signs of autism, delayed development of motor skills, and an overall aversion to authority. But then we get to Asperger's perspective, him describing himself actually viewing the child. He had no real love for anybody, but occasionally had fits of affection. Then he would embrace various people, seemingly quite unmotivated. The effect, however, was not at all pleasant. The behavior never felt like the expression of genuine affection. Instead, it appeared as abrupt as a fit. One could not help thinking that Fritz might never be able to love anyone and would never do anything solely to please somebody else. Yeah, so what the fuck?
Originally, I had like a thing here being like, oh, even though like this research paper is by a fascist, don't dismiss the impact it had on our society. But like, let's be real. It is very clear how these words have impacted how we see autism. Like, this is very visible. I think reading this is the creepiest part is how reminiscent it is of how we are just taught about autism. These ideas are very deeply rooted into our understanding of autism as it's like interpersonally as well as a society. I mean, hell, we even like named certain things that we call autism now Asperger's syndrome. We literally named it after the guy. Our other cornerstone to talk about is quite a bit better, being Leo Kanner's Autistic Disturbances of Affective Contact in April of 1941, which, while this came out later, Asperger's research didn't have a huge following outside of Germany because of the whole fascist thing until later. So this was most people's first introduction to the concept of autism. Kanner describes Donald, who is widely considered to be the first person in history to be officially diagnosed with autism. Kanner describes several behaviors surprisingly well. I mean, I was shocked reading through the paper to see the things Kanner put emphasis on that we now know very much have to do with autism, but Kanner didn't have anything else to go off of. So things like him listing off Donald's vocal stems is very impressive, and it's good that he took notice of those things. Overall, it's a really good research paper. I think it's apparent that Kanner wasn't trying to make any wild assumptions like saying that they'll be completely unlovable for their life, but rather he just wanted to observe and report his findings. Unfortunately, the paper isn't without fault though. To no fault of Leo Kanner, Donald being the first case study to be shown to the public was a pretty unfortunate coincidence, as I think it created a lot of harmful assumptions about how we view autism. You see, Donald didn't just have autism. He has what we now refer to as autistic savant syndrome. I mean, the feats that are described in these pages, if I'm reading it correctly, as a toddler, he could count to 100 and recite the alphabet forwards and backwards. Later in his life, there are reports of him being able to do absurd math equations in his head in just a few seconds. It is all very impressive. Even though the paper then goes on to list multiple cases of autism that are much more common, I think the misunderstanding, the narrative that was born out of this is clear. Autism is the cost of genius. People think it's like a heavenly restriction from Jujutsu Kaisen.
For anyone unfamiliar with the reference, no worries. Basically, a person is born with having lost something, having given something up in order to gain a superhuman ability in some other category. Actual symptoms of autism are seen as the cost for being a savant, while in reality, autistic savant syndrome is extraordinarily rare. When people say that autism or any mental disorder is a superpower, they ironically mean it quite literally. They expect an unnatural talent or ability, while the actual disorder is just your kryptonite. Mainline Hank Pym represents this idea in an interesting way, and it's one of the reasons why I like his character so much conceptually. His genius is his worth. He has this inferiority complex to prove his intelligence, to prove his worth, which makes perfect sense in the context of him being neurodivergent. Being neurodivergent is being told your entire life that if you aren't demonstrating your value, your special superpower, that people won't put up with your unordinary behavior. The social contract within people is twisted in this weird way where instead of somebody provides this value to this person's life and they provide value to this person's life, being neurodivergent is being told that you have an inherently negative value and that you have to work to make up for it, to have value to anyone, and to not just be a dead weight that people are responsible for taking care of you. Mainline Hank Pym consistently puts himself into very unhealthy situations, rides his manic episodes for more energy because he thinks if he doesn't, people won't put up with his symptoms. Bipolar isn't the cost of his genius is how he accommodates for being bipolar. Ultimate Hank doesn't have that genius to accommodate for his problems, so the question at the heart of his character, the question of his worth, is solely based on his problems. Is he inherently broken, and does he have any value despite having this superpower taken from him? And the answer is, of course, yes. We don't need any extraordinary feats for him to prove his value to this team, for him to prove that he deserves a spot on this team. He just exists, and that's enough. Tony could very easily be cited as a savant though, which means we need to dig a little deeper to figure out why he is the way he is, and that leads us to the relationship between neurodivergence and authority. Tony Stark was 5 years old when he mathematically proved that life was unfair. I am not as smart as Tony Stark. I was 9. We don't get any more information on Tony's childhood, but I am in a weirdly specific position here because on surface level, I do share a lot of similarities with Tony. When I started reading this, I was a white 19-year-old. I'm pretty well off financially. This world should benefit me, yet here I am making this video. And I think weirdly, I can fill in the gaps with my own experience. Not exactly something I was expecting to do in an analysis video, but
I think that would show, I think that's the only way to explain exactly why this book means so much to me. I was always singled out by authority figures for some reason. In the 4th grade, I was pulled aside apart from my class and given special handwriting lessons because apparently I wrote wrong. I wrote bottom up instead of top down. Something so simple, yet it had to be rectified. I fell behind the rest of my class because of this. Which it didn't work, by the way. I still write bottom up just fine. I'm okay. There were a few other incidents like this, and I ended up telling my parents that my teacher was singling me out in class. They were furious and called the school, and I remember it so vividly. The next morning, my teacher got up in front of the class and looked directly at me and was like, somebody has been lying to their parents that I've been singling them out, and then stared at me until the entire class looked at me. The fucked up part is I believed her. I thought I was lying. That's just how school was for me. They never really knew what to do with me. I went from special needs class to gifted class. Not because I actually was supposed to be in there, but because I just got good at vibe checking the exams. I can't even explain it. There was just a pattern to it all that I was innately aware of. I truly wish I could explain it better, but it's like the language itself wasn't made to describe my experience. So I have to settle for vague words like intuition when that feeling is something so much more real to me. I was made the example in all those classes though. How not to be, what not to do. I was put through agony for reasons I didn't understand. Holy shit, I'm like doomed. Being treated like that is this sick cycle because you become desperate to learn why. Why me? Why am I treated like that? You crave that diagnosis because it makes your life make sense. I wasn't picked on for no reason. I am different. Yet in the same breath, you are justifying their treatment of you. You are handing to them on a silver platter, I am different. This isn't to say I'm against diagnosis. The opposite, in fact. Getting diagnosed really helped me. All these labels say is that they can't understand us, and part of that is that we will never do exactly what they expect us to do in these systems. We were supposed to accept our position as deviants, lie crushed under the weight of our own label, who either have a useful superpower or we could just fuck off. But instead we build community. While these communities may not be perfect by any means, they have helped me think about myself and the world in a much healthier way. But it does get to an interesting question. Why is this system even in place to begin with? Why does this systematic scheme to degrade and humiliate those who differ in thinking exist? Why did a Nazi care about this? Some of the funniest shit ever to me, genuinely the universe's greatest joke, is how much fascism, this amalgamation of all of humanity's worst instincts, is countered by autism in almost every way. Asperger mentioned people with autism having an aversion to authority, which is half true. I think most mental disorders have aversion to authority listed as one of the symptoms, but that wording is so misleading, it might as well be a lie. Neurodivergent people tend to have a problem being told what to do when they don't understand the reason for it. When I was 5, my kindergarten teacher told me that recess was over and I responded that I wasn't done playing. My parents really love to tell that story. I don't know how I made it to 17 without getting diagnosed, but I do question, was I so wrong to do that? I was just thrown into this system where suddenly I had a new authority figure outside my parents, and I wasn't given any reason to respect that authority. And this isn't to say that teachers need to earn the respect of kids, they have enough to do already, but I needed time in order to get used to this system, to understand this authority and their rulings. And eventually I grew to love my kindergarten teacher, so much so that I remember getting very angry at a substitute teacher because she wouldn't let me read when my kindergarten teacher would have. not following the rules that you are given no reason to follow, being labeled an aversion to authority, is ridiculous. Fascism and authoritarianism pretty infamously don't make a lot of sense. The logic hoisting these systems up is built on nonsense propaganda, circular logic, a lack of evidence, and the sanctity of the in-group. That last one is strangely the most important because that is where the real threat neurodivergence poses to these regimes is really apparent. The in-group always hinges on the idea of a superior people, usually proven by the nonsense math and racism that is eugenics. They are propped up as acting more intelligent, and thus they act a certain way, the way you should act in a more proper society. Neurodivergence actively disproves this because we can't exist in any group. We can't appear in any group. In-group or out-group, it doesn't matter. We will appear, and whatever is the way people should act in a proper society, we will deviate. Any fundamental truth they want to cite about human nature and our divisions, we disprove by existing. I brought attention to earlier when Asperger is discussing the autists, he exclusively uses male pronouns. But there is one section in this speech where he does talk about a woman. He describes the first case study's mother, a woman that is just the most obviously autistic woman I have ever heard of. Apparently she would get overwhelmed and then just go into the mountains for a week of alone time. Every symptom Asperger has been describing, she flaunts, and he cannot deny this resemblance. It's so odd to read. It is basically just Asperger going off on this rant, shit-talking this woman for 2 paragraphs, saying that she can't communicate well, she can't dress well, she can't take care of a household, and there's no reason for it. It ends so oddly. It is him going like, we probably need more research before we can say a woman could be autistic. Why? Why? Who is the other person researching this, hypothetically? He is coining the term autism, and now he's just going, I'm probably not the authority to say whether or not this woman's autistic, because women are more emotional than intellectual, and it's such bullshit, and it just baffles me. He suddenly claims to not be qualified enough to diagnose somebody. Like, no shit, I read the rest of the paper, but why now? Why this hesitation now? And unfortunately, the answer is pretty simple. To Asperger, the label autism has a function. And describing a woman as autistic doesn't do anything. It doesn't accomplish anything because fascists already know they hate women. It is crucial for fascists to discredit us, degrade us, dehumanize us because we disprove that idea of the in-group. We can't exist in any group. In-group and out-group, we exist in both, so the theory of there being such grand differences between these groups just falls apart. They tell us we have a disorder because we fuck up whatever order they're trying to validate. They tell parents to stop vaccinating their kids or giving them Tylenol, not to actually prevent anyone from being neurodivergent. They know they can't actually prevent that, but they just want mothers to mourn when they birth a monster, because that's all we are to them. Ghost stories and folklore. I'm not sure exactly what my hair is doing, but alright. Researching this video, I was surprised to find that on the History of Autism Wikipedia page, there is a lot before Asperger and Kanner's research papers, and it starts off with a bang. It starts off by theorizing that some old European folklore, specifically the myth of the changeling, was a medieval explanation for autism. It's so strange. I've spent so long now in this video talking about the history with Nazis and how they demonized autistic and neurodivergent people, and here I just find that there is a good chance that we were demonized long before that. Literally demonized, the myth being that Satan steals the baby out of its crib and replaces it with an imposter who doesn't feel emotion. I don't know how accurate this theory is, I didn't look into it too much, but I was just caught off guard by how thematically poignant this was, this comparison to Folklore. We've already talked about how the institution treats Folklore, picking through the pieces, trying to find what they deem is valuable, even if that means breaking it apart into fuel for the fire. It's belittled into tall tales and hyperbole, our experience degraded to an exaggeration. Which finally brings me to a question that I have been specifically avoiding saying, but it's something I've just been kind of talking around. Is autism a superpower? Yes and no. We've already talked about how the institution itself treats autism as a superpower, how society views it as a superpower, and how that's untrue. But neurodiversity communities will also say those same things, that their mental disorder is a superpower. However, they mean it more in the way of our unique perspective on the world, our viewpoint we have because our brain is wired differently, is innately a superpower. And while I believe that there is a lot of value in having these different perspectives on the world, I think labeling that as superpower is strange. I think it implies this superiority in our perspective compared to the neurotypical person. We can see more. Our view on the world is more accurate, when that is of course not the case. However, keen viewers may remember earlier in this video where I redefined superpowers and kind of what they mean. Freedom and self-determination. We don't have the choice to conform with this system. Whatever order we are placed into, we end up breaking. We are always a wild card in these equations. At a certain point, we have no choice but to determine ourselves, because no one else can really do that. However, I'm not sure I can call this true freedom when I start my explanation saying that we don't have a choice on whether or not we conform. When I was 15, I was wildly depressed, and I gathered up the last bit of my energy because I just wanted to do something. My high school had this thing where you could get a little good job card from a teacher, and at the end of the week, they did a raffle where 2 people who got these good job cards could win a prize. Nobody took it too seriously, so I hatched a plan. I was going to do a perfect run. I was going to get a card from every single teacher in one day, and I was going to basically rig that raffle in my favor. I played it up as a big bit, right? But honestly, I wanted to break it. I hated this stupid fucking system, and I wanted to make a mockery of it. I hated the behaviors it was encouraging. I wanted to show how stupid it all was. Everything went exactly as planned until I got to my history class. I had problems with that teacher in ways that I never really understood, so I went in and I wanted something finite. Give me a task, give me an objective. I do this and you will give me the card, something that I can prove without a doubt that I accomplished. But instead they said just be a good student. And being good enough was never something I could accomplish. I really tried. I genuinely, to this day, have no clue what I did wrong, what made me not deserve the card. I got a card from every other class that day, and I ended up winning that raffle, getting that prize, but it didn't help my depression by any means. I didn't break the system. No one cared that I blatantly cheated. It just continued on. Weeks later, it got really bad. I felt like I was just wandering from place to place. I didn't understand time. I felt like I couldn't see. Remembering back, it's like it's just all dark. I do remember one thing from that time though. I was sitting in my history class, just thinking to myself time and time again, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry, trying to stave away some dark thoughts, to put it lightly, when my history teacher walked up to me and handed me a card. Told me that I did a good job. I only just remembered while writing this, but I kept the card. 5 years later, and I still have it. They marked it for accountability and responsibility. Ironic, as that was always something I was told that I didn't have. I kept it because it felt important, like a
like a lesson, even if I couldn't understand it back then, but I think I get it now. I realized that the only way I would be good enough for these people is if I was dead, whether that's physically or spiritually, if I give up what makes me who I am. They just wanted me gone, and that would be me, for once in my life, being accountable. 2 years later, I would learn about ADHD, and I was obsessed. Finally, the answers to all these questions I've had my entire life. And I found someone that I had a bunch of classes with, and she was diagnosed a few years ago. So, of course, I started asking her questions. I wanted to know more. Only to my surprise, learned that she learned she had ADHD because that same history teacher pulled her aside in the middle of class, gave her resources, helped her. I can't help but wonder, what about me didn't fit that criteria? What was the difference where she was valuable but held back and I walked away thinking I'm completely worthless? I can't even blame that teacher though. That's just how we're taught. I didn't match whatever stereotype they were looking for. Whatever amalgamation of behaviors and traits made up this equation in their head, the math just didn't work out for me. There isn't any reason for this. I have tried and tried to write and rewrite this video, and each time I have come to a different consensus. This is what I did wrong. This is the thing that made me go unnoticed. This is what made me not deserving of their help. But the truth is, there's no explanation. I was just unlucky. Every time I think up a theory, I remember one of my friends who actively disproves it. Half of them who fell through the cracks, doing very different things than me, and half of them who did get diagnosed, doing exactly what I did. There isn't any logic to this, and yet here I am, having spent hours trying to solve this bullshit equation. That's the scary part. We can be a poison to these authoritarian structures, but that does not make us immune to its impacts. At the end of the day, when we try to understand the world around us, we fall back onto what we know, and we end up using the same nonsense and bullshit math they use to discredit us. Tony, when asked to find the right people for the job, heroes, he starts plugging in numbers. Location, age, psychological history, past trauma. All 4 variables that are heavily considered when you go in to get a diagnosis. It doesn't work though. People are more complicated than an equation. The brain is still a black box to us. People will always act unpredictably. You are not a list of attributes or behaviors. You are you. And that is something that words cannot quite describe. It is weirdly why we have names, because no other adjective does you justice. There is only 1 to 4 words that can describe you, and it is your full name. We have to remember this though when we evaluate our own self-worth as well as the worth of others. Stop holding ourselves to this standard that is so deeply ingrained in us. Stop running the numbers in our head to justify our own existence. The rot in our world runs very deep, and nobody is unaffected. If we want to fix the world, our first step, our responsibility is to recognize how that rot has affected us, where it has poisoned us, so that we don't perpetuate these same systems. This video has definitely evolved into something else. Me just desperately trying to figure out how a single comic issue had such an impact on my life. I've talked a lot about this idea of your future was stolen from you, and I've used the term abstract to describe that idea multiple times, but honestly, I have been misleading. I don't think that's an abstract idea. I know for a fact something has been stolen from me, something I can't describe or explain, forced to reduce my feeling down to a hunch or intuition. Did you know that like half of that diagnosis criteria for mental disorders, half of those behaviors we see as abnormal aren't
things you're born with. They're learned traits, things you just pick up from living in this world. Trauma responses that are so common in neurodivergent people that they become the very criteria we use to diagnose it. Is there any other way to describe that than us having been systematically robbed of something? Somewhere along the line of human evolution, there must have been a benefit to having people who think differently. So much benefit that these traits and behaviors have been passed down for generations and continue to be passed down even when the world is shouting at us that they no longer want us. But we don't know the function of these mental disorders. We don't know their purpose within the greater society. We don't know the benefit they provided. It's been lost to time. All we have now are theories. And while they're interesting, we can never prove them because the very society we live in doesn't allow us to fulfill that purpose, that function. Our future was stolen. I started this video asking how it is that Iron Lad turns into a monster. And the answer is pretty simple, but a little cliche, unfortunately. Monsters aren't born, they're made. It's become a very common theme in media the past 20 years, I feel, but always in a very simple sense. You poke the bear and now it's out for revenge. You push somebody too far and now the consequences. You've made the monster. It hinges on the idea of somebody having a single breaking point, that moment where man turns to beast, where our humanity is gone because we were pushed too far. But I'll ask you this, how does this idea work with somebody who has been treated like a monster from the moment they were born?
I am autism. I'm visible in your children, but if I can help it, I am invisible to you until it's too late. I know where you live.
The idea of a single breaking point becomes comedic in this context. Life is just a long series of compromises trying to fit into a world that decided before you even opened your eyes that it did not want you. I don't think this idea is exactly exclusive to neurodivergent people either. Everyone is somewhat scarred from this world. Everyone has made sacrifices trying to live up to a standard you will never meet. The reason AI, like corporations, are loving it is because they finally have the mindless machines they have always wanted out of us. There is a moment where you realize your future has been stolen from you. There is a grand realization. It does not come from anyone showing you the future that was stolen from you, though. It is when you, whoever you are, neurodivergent or not, finally step out of denial. Accept that this world has scarred you in ways you will never recover from. My entire life, I have failed to meet the standard I was expected to, but superheroes have always been there for me. Every time I got knocked down, Spider-Man would be right there telling me to get back up. But I have to wonder, is that me just trying to live up to another standard that I have no hope of ever meeting? The people I've always looked up to have been so far away, impossible to reach. I can't be Peter Parker. I think the Ultimates lit such a fire in me because for once I thought, I can do that. I can be that. I guess I just felt seen. A character telling me that, yeah, I was right to have always been fighting just that little bit, fighting injustice where I see it. That beating sense of justice that I've tried to bury down because it felt like if I gave into it, it would swallow me whole, was justified. My experience was not hyperbole. After my last video, I had a few comments that asked how I'm so intelligent for my age, which was surreal to read. I mean, my entire life I've been told that I have potential, and to have just strangers tell me that I'm like above average for my age is, I mean, it's really affected me. Thank you all, you're very sweet. But to answer that question, how I'm so intelligent for my age, I think the answer is simple. I had a good role model.
everybody, just want to thank you all for watching. I mean, it means the world that I'm allowed to talk about something I love and people are willing to listen. I mean, it's surreal. I can't get over it. I overheard my mom on the phone with her friends the other day telling my mom how, like, I'm never gonna move out. So if you guys could subscribe so that I could make money from this and then, like, really show them, that would be great. Anyways, I'm not sure what comic to do next, like an analysis on, so if you have any suggestions, put them in the comments. I read every comment. There were a few last video that, like, meant the world to me, genuinely. Like, I'm weird about pride in general, like feeling proud of myself, so seeing people genuinely talk about the video having an impact on them, like, please, if it did and you want to comment, I will read it. Like, I guarantee it. I read all of them, and it truly does mean the world to me. So don't feel like there's no point to commenting. I promise I read them. Bye.